everybody. Welcome back. We got ourselves another episode of the Movie Commentary Podcast coming at you today. I'm your host, Nick Everett, and I apologize for the little flub up there at the beginning. And today we have ourselves a definitely very interesting film that we're going to watch today. We are watching Stanley Kubrick's 1968 sci-fi masterpiece, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I would say, without a doubt, is the most unique film in, I think, cinematic history. You know, you get the phrase that it's the best film, and you get that thrown out there. And I don't know if I'll say that, but it's something that it's definitely it's a personal favorite of mine. I really like watching it. I will admit, I highly recommend, if you haven't watched it, definitely go watch it, because I'm not going to lie, a lot of the podcast is going to basically be trying to fill empty space because there is not a lot of dialogue in this film. So definitely check it out. I wouldn't say it's the easiest film to watch, but I think it's definitely something to check out. So I'm going to go ahead and start the film here. And it's actually kind of funny because you start the movie. Because I have the older Blu-ray of 2001. They have I think they released the Blu-ray. It's 2021. I think they released it about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit before that, maybe 2012, 2013, something like that. So it's not exactly a new Blu-ray, and they actually have they've actually upgraded it. They've uploaded a 4K Blu-ray as well, but I'm pretty sure every time that you start the film here, you immediately start with a black screen set to George. I believe his name is George Ligeti, and the film title is called, and the music piece that we were being played is called Atmospheres. Let's see here. So we get this musical composition, Atmospheres, that, you really kind of start the film here. You're kind of part of you is probably thinking when you start the film, is something wrong with my TV because I can't see the film, but I can hear it, and that's just kind of what they call the overture, because a lot of films back in a lot of epic films back in the 50s, 60s, when they were probably the heyday of the epic, those were a lot of times where they would put, like literally overture title cards on there and intermission title cards, which this film has. So, and I think it sets a great tone for the film. I mean, it's really eerie, really mysterious piece of music that just, and it also, I think, also adds the tone of ambiguity, because you're just kind of wondering, what the heck is going on here, and it's going to be a question that you're going to be asking yourself quite a lot when you're watching this film. So. And so, yeah, this is going to be it's about a 2.5 hour, 2 hour, 20, 2 hour, 40-minute movie, I think. And, as I said before, there's not a whole lot of dialogue. There's only 40 minutes of dialogue in the entire film, so. And so I guess I'll kind of talk about the genesis of the story that became 2001: A Space Odyssey. So, I usually the story of 2001 was kind of co-created by Stanley Kubrick, its director, legendary film director. I'd say one of probably the greatest film director that has ever lived. And then you have Arthur C. Clarke, science fiction writer. And after Stanley Kubrick finishes 1964 film, black comedy Dr. Strangelove, which is another film that I want to do a podcast of, then he decided, hey, let's get together with Arthur C. Clarke. I think he had a mutual friend, guy by the name of Karras, I believe, who kind of hooked them up and decided they wanted to make a consummate sci-fi film here. And they decided to center a lot of the story around a short story that Arthur C. Clarke had written. I think back in the mid to late 50s, story titled The Sentinel, which is basically about humans discovering an artifact that has been buried on the moon's surface, which is something that we're going to get to, kind of basically something that happens kind of midway in the film here. So that's kind of and that met in 64, and then the film took about 4 years to make, kind of get the story made afterwards, and then the production. So Again, a 4-year process for this movie. I mean, it was an intense process to make. So, and then we have the famous, what we're watching here, the famous opening title card. We basically have the Earth kind of rising over the moon, but then you also have the sun rising over the Earth. It's kind of a nice little like alignment. And then we have the famous also Sprach, or Thus Spake Zarathustra, sunrise, theme that's become, absolutely synonymous with this film, and that's the thing with this film is the music is, I think second to none, and I'll get to in the music a little bit later, because there's actually an interesting piece about it, but, also there's the Thus Spake Zarathustra is the, definitely the theme that everybody kind of took away from this film, so. Okay, so this is part one. Okay, so this is the first question of what the heck is going on here, because, and I remember when I first saw this movie, this was something that I definitely asked. So I was so you start off in this movie it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. You're thinking that it's going to be a movie in space, and then all of a sudden we get a title card that says The Dawn of Man, and then we're transported millions and millions of years in the past to what looks to be, I would say, some desert in Africa, or at least what it looks like, or some desert somewhere. I wouldn't know where. So, and we're greeted with a lot of these, just still photographs. Actually, yeah, a lot of these, you have a lot of these establishing landscape shots, and these aren't actually film shots themselves. These are all still photographs, and that they would take. They had like helicopter units that I forgot the location, but they had helicopter units that went to, like, I think deserts in, like, Africa, and they would literally take photographs, and it was actually funny because Stanley Kubrick was a very interesting character. I mean, I've talked about him a little bit in my Shining podcast, and I definitely want to do some more podcasts of him, but he had a pilot's license, and yet he had a fear of flying, so whenever they had to, basically go shoot this scene here, he basically sent his second unit filmmakers to go film it. So, and then we're also introduced to the gorillas. They're essentially they're actually more apes. They're more like humanoid, ape like creatures, that are. Again, I never really got what they really were. I think there was actually a word for it, so to speak. I'm going to look it up here just real quick. And as we go here, they're kind of, you can say that they're struggling. So what they're called are hominids, which are basically a family of primates, extinct species of primates that, basically were very humanoid-looking apes. And, of course, I mean, they're not actually apes in this film. They're actually humans in ape costumes, which actually is a very interesting part of production history with this film. Stuart Freeborn was the man that created the ape-like costumes. Let me just look it real quick here. And so Stuart Freeborn was essentially he was the makeup effects guy that essentially created the ape-like costumes and the ape masks and all that kind of in the costumes. Stuart Freeborn, nobody would really recognize the face. However, he has a striking resemblance to Yoda from Star Wars because he actually was the guy that essentially designed Yoda, and I believe he actually designed him over his own face. But Stuart Freeborn, they had a lot of trouble designing the ape costumes because, I mean, it's really easy for it to look fake, for it just to look like a guy in an ape costume. But that was one thing that they were trying to not go for, and it was and they actually the guy that actually was basically he played the main ape. He played the ape that they call Moonwatcher. We don't know his name in this movie here, but there's actually the book 2001: A Space Odyssey that was released essentially at the same time. There's an ape called Moonwatcher, and he essentially was the leader of this struggling pack of apes. And Dan Richter was working with Stuart Freeborn, and they were trying to design these, costumes. And Dan Richter went out and he would go and actually take, he would film, go to various zoos in London. They filmed this entire movie over in London, and they were, taking, video. He was taking cameras of, apes and, trying to, see how they would act and all that kind of stuff so they can, mime it out. And they basically got Dan Richter and a whole bunch of mimes basically to, choreograph all these, ape-like movements. And I tell you, I mean, it's, it's really, I don't want to say lifelike, but at the same time, I mean, they are really, I mean, they do a good job. I mean, you can't, it's really tough to tell that these actually are, just, not humans in a costume. And the thing is, the masks that they wore, they were they had toggles in it, that their tongue could, move to move the mouth and the tongue on the face, and then they had their eyes that went up to their eyes in the film here that they show a couple times are actually the real eyes, and they had I don't know, I'm not sure. I think their arms were actually, I think their hands went up to their in their costume as well. So and the thing with the apes in this movie here was that they're really the thing that became a problem with the costumes. So they got these costumes down, and all the people that had to be in the costumes had to be really kind of slim, slender, hipped people. Because if you had anybody really bulky, it would look kind of fake. Just people, humans in an ape costume. So one of the things that got really kind of tough for these actors when they were doing these scenes was the way that they were filming these shots, because all these scenes, they're taking place in a desert area. I can't really tell where exactly, but they're actually all being filmed on a soundstage, and there was a pioneering filming technique that they were using to film these shots that actually made it really unbearable to it made it really tough for these actors. So I want to, and I'll get to that in just a sec. I want to, kind of catch us up on where we're at in the film here. So essentially, we have these, humanoid apes, and they were at this watering hole, and they were drinking water and all that kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden, you had this other kind of packed tribe of apes essentially came in and basically just ran them off of the watering hole. And now they're basically, you can kind of see them, in basically kind of cowering under these rocks and kind of hiding, and obviously, they're kind of scared of something, and and they're gonna wake up the next morning, and they're gonna discover something very, very weird here. So, and what was I gonna say? There was something, and again, one thing you gotta imagine, you remember, there is no spoken dialogue here. This is all just grunts and whatnot from apes, and there's no spoken words here, nothing that we can understand. I mean, this is all visual storytelling so far. And, when you first watch this movie, you're going to first probably be like, what the heck is going on? But, I think you can also get some of the sense that, there's something that, you can kind of follow the story. So, so now the tribe of apes that we followed here, they have woken up from their sleep, and they awoken to this giant black rectangular slab just kind of standing up in the middle of their kind of hidey hole, so to speak. And there's another Ligeti piece that's played. I think this one's called Requiem, which you actually get played. I think it's Requiem. I'm not sure. It's a Ligeti piece. The same guy that did the overture. It becomes a piece that you hear basically every single time that you see the monolith on the screen. But the apes are they're very scared of the monolith. But one of them, they kind of get curious and start to reach out to touch it, and then they all slowly start to kind of gather around the monolith. And, something obviously is happening to their psyche, so to speak. Now, obviously, pretty sure, for those of you that have not seen this movie, I'm pretty sure you have seen the monolith in some kind of pop culture reference somewhere, it's become a part of, obviously pop culture, since this movie was released. and it's a very famous part of this movie. So, and then obviously, people are asking, what the heck is this monolith doing here? And it's partially, I think it's kind of a stand-in for extraterrestrials and and aliens and that kind of thing. What I think, of course, this movie has a lot of open interpretations for anybody. So, and the thing that was interesting about the monolith or the object was that it was actually meant to be. It went through a lot of varying stages during production. Like at first, they wanted to make it a tetrahedron, which is essentially like a pyramid-looking shape-ish. And then that kind of fell through. It didn't look as foreboding or as mysterious as I think Stanley Kubrick wanted it to look. And so what ended up happening, what they ended up doing was they decided, hey, let's just make it a giant, big flat rectangular-looking, object. And they made that, and then after that, Arthur C. Clarke, they wanted it originally also to like showcase a message, or showcase kind of project like a TV would, project like a little message for the apes and whatnot. And they decided they didn't really want to do that, and I think they also wanted it to become like a transparent looking material at first, to basically be clear, where you can look through it. So it went through a lot of different changes, and I think ultimately the one that they went with, obviously the most mysterious looking design they had, probably for the best. So, and so now we have a pivotal moment coming here in the film. Basically, what we're seeing here is obviously and of course what I give is my own interpretation when I'm saying a lot of these things. When you watch this movie, it's your own interpretation, but I'm going to give you some of my own interpretations. What you're seeing here is the ape that we know as Moonwatcher, and this is actually played by Dan Richter. He is basically discovering the use of tools and the use of weapons, and he basically, what it basically looks like is, he picks up a bone, and he basically kind of starts hitting stuff with it. And then when he realizes that, hey, I can pick this thing up and just smash these, because he's kind of hanging around like a skeleton. I'm going around and smashing all this, smashing all these all these bones, and I can use this thing to do all these things and whatnot. And you also hear the Spake Zarathustra theme song again. And I think that it's obviously indicative of something important happening. So, because then after that, because after he discovers that, then you see that, he's that they're actually, they've actually been able to go out and hunt animals, and they're actually able to eat good meat now. Because before they were kind of struggling with eating twigs and bushes and all that kind of stuff. So, excuse me. So, I kind of wanted to hit on, there was something, and I kind of mentioned it before, but so when filming these shots here with the ape creatures, they actually got very hot for the actors in the ape costumes. They actually had one of the things that I remember watching a video was that they can only take 15 minutes. They only had about 15 minutes of time where they could actually keep the ape costumes on, and one of the reason of that was because there were on the sound stage that they were at, there were so many lights that were used to light the stage, and a reason and there was also another thing that they were using, and it was something that was called front projection filming. And essentially, what front projection filming was is that essentially, when they were on this soundstage here, they were on a soundstage, and behind the soundstage was a ginormous screen. I believe it was 40 by 90 feet, or it was a ginormous screen that you could project stuff onto. And what they decided to do was they did the front projection filming, which means they could actually project the image onto this. They projected it onto this angled reflective material, and that reflective material would actually project it onto the background, and they would actually, and the image would be projected through be projected, through the actors. And the awesome thing about it was that the camera would actually be angled at that same angle that, the material was being reflected, that the image was being reflected by. So, and so and so a lot of times, you'd think like, hey, if you're projecting an image onto something and you got people in front of it, there's going to cast shadows. But the camera was positioned in such a way where, though the shadows were already, very, not as vibrant as they were, but I mean, you wouldn't see the shadows because of the front projection. And because of the front projection in the background, they had to light the foreground in order to essentially, match the lighting in the background. And one thing that, I'll definitely hit on as this movie goes on, Stanley Kubrick is a very particular director when it comes to his lighting. So here we have a bone thrown in the air, and it's a match cut where the bone comes down and it turns into a satellite. I know I just kind of jumped there. So basically what just happened is the ape tribe that got kind of pushed out and then finally discovered the monolith, and then they discovered the use of, bones as tools. They went back to the watering hole and basically retook it, and it was the first use of a weapon. The Moonwatcher uses the bone, and they had the other lead ape from the other tribe kind of charge at him, and he basically whacked him on the head, killed him, and they just in a sense reasserted their dominance and took over the watering hole again. And essentially was the first, use of a weapon, ever, first use of a weapon, by man. So, and then after that, what happens is that you got Moonwatcher. He takes the bone and he throws it up in the air, and you kind of get this bone where it kind of spins and spins, and as it comes down, you get this match cut where it essentially just cuts to a satellite coming down. And so now we're in space, and we're basically seeing all these, different spaceships basically, around the Earth and, kind of, just doing their thing up there, so to speak. It's interesting because we don't really know, so we get all these shots of these different satellites, and we don't really know what they are, so to speak, but what we realize is that there's actually there was actually supposed to be a narration of this section, in which we actually get a narration of that all these satellites are actually basically they're nuclear bomb satellites that essentially are able to send nuclear attacks to any point on Earth. And it's essentially, the match cut was essentially from the bone to the satellite was essentially just it was essentially just the evolution of man's weapons. We go from a weapon of a bone, being able to kill an ape, to essentially a giant satellite on Earth being able to, launch a nuclear warhead onto the ground that can kill millions. So, obviously the evolution of, humanity right there. So now we're on basically what we do is we get caught up to a man that we later know his name is Haywood Floyd, and we're on basically a plane in space that is by the flight and the airline. It was the airline Pan Am. Of course, it kind of dates the film because Pan Am's not around any longer. But essentially, we have this guy. He's kind of flying in space, and he's essentially what we realize is that he is actually flying to this giant space station, basically the circular space station that kind of rotates, given its own gravity. So, and if I don't know if you can hear this in the background, but you can hear the Blue Danube being played. And for those of you that don't know what the Blue Danube is, that is essentially the intro and outro music to this podcast. That's essentially and I picked that music actually partly because of 2001: A Space Odyssey, or actually when I was originally designing this podcast, I originally wanted to have the opening and outro music be the Thus Spake Zarathustra, theme from this movie. But copyright issues, and I couldn't find a royalty-free version that I liked, and I found a pretty good royalty-free version of the Blue Danube. So I decided, hey, let's just do that. So that's basically why that came to be. So, and so, excuse me. I mean, during this entire time, we have, spaceships, basically just in orbit, spaceships in orbit around each other, right, in orbit around the Earth. And again, no dialogue. Absolutely, we're 25 minutes into this podcast, and there's been no dialogue at all. There's no dialogue in this film, so kind of gives you of what we're going to expect later on as we go through this film here. So, I know a lot of people, they kind of they've kind of mentioned like how the space station and because you got the space station and then the Pan Am kind of space flight kind of lining each other up, and they're basically, and the Blue Danube is like a waltz, it's like a ballet. So people kind of basically call this scene like the ballet in space. It's like two spaceships dancing with each other. You get a lot of people that say that it's too long. I mean, it's boring. And what I'd say, maybe yes, I don't know, but I mean, I don't know. It's kind of cool to watch, though. I mean, again, this isn't a movie that you're like, oh, I'm gonna watch this with my buddies. No, this is kind of a movie that it's kind of an event. You got to really make an occasion of watching it, to be quite honest with you. But it is what it is. So. And so now we are entering the space station. And here we have our first spoken words. All right, it is 26 minutes into the film, and we have our first spoken words. All righty. So we're getting into onto the space station here, and essentially, what they're doing is they're doing the passport. They're basically like going through like the customs essentially on the space station. He basically has to go through, hey, I'm Floyd, American, blah blah blah, this and that kind of thing. So it's kind of like a passport, going through the like customs at an airport, that kind of thing. Now, I believe that all the women, because they're showing all these, like, they're showing a woman that kind of escorted him on the elevator. There was an elevator that Floyd came up on, and then there was a woman that he met, that was the receptionist, and then there's a woman kind of on the screen here that's basically asking him for all these all these things, that kind of thing, and I believe they're all British actresses, actually, and I think they had to, like, put on American accents, because I remember a lot of the actresses and, extras that were on this film were, that have really small parts, were just locals, and again, this film was shot primarily in London. In fact, I think it was shot all in London on, like, various stages and all that kind of stuff, so. And here we have another example of so one thing about this film that's really famous is basically how correct it was in predicting the future. Exhibit A was they had voice print identification for Floyd here. He essentially was he basically had to go through customs, and he was like, hey, my name's Floyd, and I'm American, this and that, and voice print identification, all that kind of stuff. And then, and now what's going on here is that he is doing a video call, which everybody knows what that is nowadays, where he's doing a video call to his little daughter back on Earth, and he's basically, talking with him. What's interesting is that this little girl that they're showing here on the screen, this is actually Stanley Kubrick's daughter, Vivian. When she was, I believe, when she filmed this was she was like 6 or 7 years old. When she filmed it, so it was really funny because I remember Stanley when he was when Stanley was filming. It was kind of funny when he was filming it. He was filming his own daughter, so it was kind of a cute moment with him. But and then they're talking about how like, hey, it's her birthday and all that kind of stuff. So yada yada. I mean, anyway, so it's another thing where we have video calls every day now almost. I mean, that's essentially, especially given the circumstances of the pandemic, that's something that's been not only used every day in life. It's almost essential for some people now, for their work and for their job. So, I mean, it's something really, forward thinking for Kubrick for this movie when he was making it, was to make something that was realistic for the future and predicting the future. So, of course, what's different here is that they actually he was charged money in order to call his daughter. So, and then and another thing that's interesting here is actually some of the attire that they actually use, like the clothes that they're wearing and all that kind of stuff. Now you got to remember, this is 1966, 65, 1965 to 67 when they were basically filming all these scenes here. They were trying to again make educated guesses on what clothing of the future would look like. And what's really interesting here is that all of the suits that the men are wearing are essentially have no buttons on them. So, and again, as much as it's kind of a compliment or kind of a testament of how detailed oriented Kubrick was, because he was so detail oriented on how this film would look and how it would be. Like, he basically he was really detailed in what the clothes would look like for the men, what for the women, how the sets would be designed, what companies, what product placement he would have in his film, because as you can see, there's been a lot of like Howard Johnson stores. There's been a lot of IBM computer looks in this movie. So there's even a story where he actually essentially determined the time zone in which the space station would use time up in space. Of course, we don't really even care about that. We're only on the space station for only a couple more minutes. So, and again, it just kind of the details of Kubrick is just he's just so detail oriented. It's not even funny. Some of the stuff that he does, because a lot of directors, even nowadays, wouldn't even worry that much about some of those minute details. So there is it's a very interesting kind of conversation here, and it actually has a lot of kind of like social, political undertones to it, given the circumstances of the time, actually. So you have a Russian doctor named Dr. Smyslov, who is met up with Dr. Floyd, the character that we're following here, and Dr. Smyslov is asking Dr. Smyslov is asking Haywood Floyd about essentially, hey, we've heard about these strange occurrences going up on the moon, because Haywood Floyd has said that he's going to the moon. There's this moon base called Clavius, and everybody here is basically stating that hey, there's been these very odd happenings and very strange occurrences going on the moon base up at Clavius. And Dr. Smyslov, obviously Russian scientist, he's asking Floyd, hey, what's going on up there? Are you able to tell us what's going on? Because they had a situation in which they had a situation where people were denied landing at Clavius, so which apparently was a big rule breaker. And Haywood Floyd obviously was saying, I'm not at liberty to discuss this. So one of the things that they say, the political and social undertones. You got to remember, this is 65 to 67 when this film was mostly being filmed. And that's the height of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis was just like 3 years before that. And, they're showing all of these, they're showing, Russian and American scientists, talking, in a pretty, friendly manner, and I mean, of course, the American, has information that the Russian wants, obviously, but of course the American can't tell them, so. And so now we are on I believe we're on the shuttle Ares, and we have left the space station, and now we're going to the moon. We're going to Clavius. And they use pictures of the moon in this film here. They use actual photographs that NASA took of the moon, and they obviously they project it onto the film here. I will admit, I will try my best to describe some of the special effects because, for any of you interested in behind-the-scenes special effects for this movie, I highly recommend looking on YouTube. Cinema Tyler, Cinema Tyler. He has a YouTube channel, and he has a 7-part documentary series that essentially goes over how Stanley Kubrick made this film, and it goes well in depth on how a lot of the special effects shots were done. But essentially what a lot of them were done is there was a lot of photography on animation stands. Essentially, you'd have a camera kind of mounted on, kind of looking down, and you'd have a stand in which you could move glass plates of pictures around, and you can kind of and it kind of looks like animated and somewhat. It's kind of similar to how Walt Disney he had layers of glass plates and on a stand, and he had a camera on a stand where he can kind of move the camera in and out and kind of give his 2D animation a lot more depth and field and all that kind of stuff. Now this is an interesting scene. Another interesting set of special effects that were used in this film was the use of rotating rooms and rotating cameras, because what they just showed here was the famous scene of one of the maids on the shuttle, essentially walking. Basically, she stands in this circular kind of looking apparatus, and she literally walks on the wall upside down and then kind of steps off. And again, it kind of makes it look like that the shuttle itself, there's not really any true up or down there. I mean, they kind of just are able to walk any which way they please. So, and as we see in this film, there's not a whole lot of there's actually, I think what they actually say is that there's a weightless environment actually on this film here, because they actually show certain instances of objects being floated away from the characters. So. And this is actually, it's kind of funny. They have a zero-gravity toilet that Floyd tries to use, and it's it's literally a 10 paragraphs long list of instructions to use. So, and again, the Blue Danube kind of picks back up, and we're watching the shuttle kind of approach the moon, and we have all these different shuttle shots of the moon, and then the shuttle in the background, and then the shuttle, and then the stars in the background. I mean, all that stuff had to be I think the moon was photographed, and then you would have they would photograph the shuttle, and then I think they would mat it all together. They would literally mat it all together onto one film strip. And with a lot of the special effects shots done on this film, they were able to put them on. They were the coloring, the process that they were able to use. I'm not privy that much to special effects, but essentially the way they were able to do it was they were able to cut special effects shots as if they were actual film shots, which was something that usually they didn't do before in making special effects before. So, this shot, they have it's basically a small shot of the lander of the space shuttle essentially lowering onto the moon, and you basically would have to film. They would have to film the shuttle against a black backdrop, and then they would have to film basically the background, and then they would basically have to photograph all the elements together, and they would have to put it onto one film stock onto one piece of film. So, and then even with some films, even with some shots, they have a lot of rear projection that they had to put onto into the windows of the shuttle, because you see some you see some shots of the shuttle kind of lowering onto the moon. You can see inside the shuttle, like you can see like the cockpit inside the shuttle, and you can see like moving parts inside there, and that was all like done rear projection. There's a lot. This movie I think is the single greatest exercise in practical effects. I mean, every single special effect that was done in this film was done either physically somehow, chemically somehow, but no digital effects were done in this movie. I mean, this was, well before the age that, CG effects were, ever so commonplace. And even the, shots like this, like they have the space shuttle lowering onto the Clavius moon base, and we're kind of looking up into the stars. Even something, that looks as simple as, the stars in the background, that was something that was, very, difficult to deal with. I mean, because, like, the brightness of the stars, I mean, there would be some times where the stars would bleed over, it would kind of give this, like, really interesting looking effect where the stars would essentially bleed over the space shuttle, and it would kind of look obviously not look right. And then, there would be some film stocks, like I think, there'd be some film stocks like 70 millimeter, 35 millimeter, 65 millimeter that, the stars would be too bright, but then there would be some film stock where the stars would not be bright enough at all. So it was all kinds of photography, done in this film in order to get the shots that, we were obviously wanting to look at. So, and then even there's a shot where the shuttle finally lands, and then it gets lowered into a giant airlock. And then what you can see is like there's like little rooms kind of like on the sides of the airlock, little windows where you can see people kind of looking out at, and all these people, and you obviously see that there are people in there, and again those are all like that was all all these like individual shots are shot at one time or another, then refilmed together into the shot itself. I mean, it's all very complicated and intricate effects work, and it's very impressive actually, how much they do. And there's a lot more in this film. I mean, shoot, this film is basically one giant special effects dailies reel. So and so we have gotten off of the space shuttle now, basically the shuttle Ares, and now we're in this like little like conference room and there's all these men and women that are kind of seated at this like U-shaped table, and Haywood Floyd is essentially getting up and going to give a speech to all those members at the base there. Now, what's really interesting here is that there's two men that are speaking in this film. There's in this scene here. There's the man that's speaking right now. I forgot his name. I believe his name was Halverson, and then there's Floyd as well. And there was actually a funny story about these two actors. So Floyd here is about to give like a speech about how hey, you guys have discovered something amazing, and you've done this and you've done that, and we need to keep it secret and all this kind of stuff. And apparently, William Sylvester, the actor that plays Haywood Floyd, apparently he had a really tough time doing his lines. And I think Halverson, in the next scene that we'll see, he had a tough time doing his lines there as well. And so, I forget if it was either Sylvester or the actor that plays Halverson. I forget which one. But apparently Kubrick was getting pretty upset that these guys just could not nail down their lines. Like, they literally would take after take after take of trying to do their lines and all that kind of stuff. And essentially it got to the point where I think Stanley Kubrick sent an assistant. I don't know if it was assistant director Derek Cracknell or somebody, but apparently he sent somebody to these guys, like, hey, make these guys, know that, they cannot mess up again. And I think the assistant literally made it seem like they were about to be fired, and they were given getting plane tickets back to the United States or whatever, boat tickets back to the United States or whatever. And apparently the actors, either the actor playing William Sylvester or the other actor that plays Halverson, I'm not sure who exactly, they apparently were really scared or really shaken from this, and after that they never forgot their lines after that. So it was kind of And apparently Kubrick did not even have a he kind of thought of this form of persuasion, I'll say, is kind of amusing. Of course, Stanley Kubrick, he's kind of a he's kind of he a bit of I wouldn't say a sadistic person, but he's got a really maybe a bleak sense of humor, so to speak. So. One thing that's really interesting about this council room here is that all the walls are like just bright white lights. They look like the lights of the entire room. And again, I mean, it just goes back to how Kubrick, how he was extremely precise about how his set should be lit. I mean, Stanley Kubrick's very famous for filming a movie, Barry Lyndon, which he released in 1975, in which he would film scenes only to candlelight, in which that was the only light in the actual film. It's in the room itself, which, with anybody that knows anything about cameras and how light exposure happens in lenses and cameras, filming a movie scene by light is almost unheard of. I mean, it's almost inexplicable. It doesn't happen. Stanley Kubrick, he had to get these specialized lenses from NASA that were used to film moon shots on NASA in order to capture in order to get the aperture of the film, or something lens right, and in order to get the light correct. So. And then one thing that you also notice in the shot is its perfect symmetry. I mean, it's a U-shaped table, and Heywood Floyd is standing literally right in the middle. I mean, the right direct middle of the shot there. And again, that's something you kind of see a lot with Kubrick, is his symmetry when it comes to films there. Because I mean, that's something I'll hit on a little bit later. Kind of for this one right here, they have this. There's what they call a moon bus, and it's basically it's taking them out to this area. They don't know exactly what. We don't know exactly what yet, but the moon bus is literally right in the center of the frame, and literally there was and even this shot right here, we're in the cockpit of the moon bus now, and it's literally there's two mirrors outside that are almost symmetrically placed, they're almost reflected, and it's such a symmetrical looking image where you can essentially fold it on top of itself, and you're essentially just going to get the same looking picture on both sides. I mean, it's really and that's how a lot of Kubrick films work, is the symmetry there. So, and then the moon bus here, some more effect shots here. A lot of the effect shots when it came to spaceships kind of moving and kind of having a film that's spaceships were moving and all that kind of stuff. A lot of those were actually filmed as the spaceships were actually two-dimensional pictures. They actually didn't they would take pictures of the they would photograph the pictures of the spaceship models, and then they would essentially kind of animate them against different backdrops and all that kind of stuff. I mean, because there's a lot of models where there's not a lot of depth to them. It's not like in Star Wars where you have the X-wings and the Millennium Falcon turning and all that kind of stuff. They're basically photographing two-dimensional photographs and essentially making them pretend to move. So. I love this little scene between it's Heywood, Halverson, and I believe Williams or Michaels or something like that. It's three people talking here, and they're basically, and Halverson and the other guy are basically briefing Floyd on what's happening. So basically, up until this point, there's been a sense of mystery. There's something is happening up at this moon base here, and then they even stated that even and in Heywood in the meeting there, he essentially in the meeting, there's like, hey, we have to, you guys have discovered something amazing, but we have to keep it secret. We cannot let this out. And what we're getting here is a little more, exposition here. It's a big exposition dump right here. That there's something out there, some magnetic anomaly out there. They call it TMA-1, Tycho Magnetic Anomaly 1, which is essentially Tycho is essentially the moon crater right next to it. And they're talking about a thing, and it's an object, and essentially what they're basically being stated that's really a bit mysterious about the whole ordeal is that the object itself has essentially been deliberately buried. They said that it hasn't been covered up by natural causes or natural erosion. It's essentially looks like it has been deliberately buried into the moon's surface. And that's where the moon bus that's where it's taking them is out to the Tycho crater where they have it at. So and I will admit, all these special effects shots, going back to them because they're so amazing in this film. I mean, nowadays, with the CG and all that kind of stuff, I mean, we have light years of effect shots, ahead of what Kubrick was able to do in this film here. But even still, I mean, it's really impressive the stuff that they were even able to pull off here. I mean, I would say that the effects hold up, even today. I mean, some people might say they don't, but I mean, if you want a realistic looking, shoot, there's some like movies today where I say the effects don't even hold up. So I mean, it's not a problem that is new. I mean, it's not a problem that's old or new. It's a problem that's going to probably be happening for the rest of our lives. So, all right, and so essentially they're landing the moon bus now, and it's really interesting. They actually have all these like different like layouts and all these like different like readings like in the cockpits of all these like of all these spaceships that they've been flying around in. A lot of those, there were like all these like different individual animations that they were showing, and they were actually being projected on like these different projectors from behind. So it's really interesting actually how they were able to do all that. All the displays in the cockpits and all that kind of stuff. And now we have the big reveal of what TMA-1 really is. The Tycho Magnetic Anomaly number 1 is. It is hey, look at that, another monolith. And what they show here is that there's basically a giant hole in the ground in which there is a big black monolith basically just being kind of sticking out of the ground. And then they're showing 6 astronauts essentially kind of standing here. It's actually kind of funny. There's a shot right here it's kind of like straight out of Avengers. They're like showing the astronauts kind of like standing there looking out at the monolith here. It's almost like a photograph. It's like the astronauts barely even move. And again, interesting. And again, here, no dialogue here. I mean, there has been a little bit of dialogue, with Floyd and all the other actors, but this scene here, there's no dialogue. I mean, these guys literally just silently look at each other, look down at the monolith, and start walking down the ramp here. And from what I read, there's actually a book that I read that kind of basically chronicles the making of this film. There actually was a spoken line in this film. There's like, hey, should we go down and see it? And they're like, yes, let's go see it. Of course, a bit redundant. You didn't really even need to say that. But yeah, I mean, this scene did have dialogue, and a lot of what was cut out of this movie was dialogue. I mean, Kubrick, he did cut some parts out of it. I mean, I'll kind of hit on some of that a little bit, as the movie goes on, but Kubrick did cut out, large chunks of dialogue in this film that, he just didn't really feel, necessary, so to speak. And so they're all walking down. They're basically in this giant pit, and there's like these like different, floodlights in the pit, and then you got the monolith, the same looking monolith, the same black rectangular shape that, was used, in the Dawn of Man sequence, essentially used right here. So, and this scene right here. This is the first shot that was. This is the first days of shooting right here, was filming this shot. Now this is the only I believe parts of the film that were not filmed at MGM Bournemouth. So the majority of the sets that were made at this film were made at the MGM Bournemouth Studios in, I believe, somewhere. I think London. I'm not exactly sure if they were in London, but these shots right here were actually made at what's called a studio called Shepperton Studios. I believe those were in London, actually. And the reasons was because like they were able to actually build this giant hole of a set there, because as you can see, it's literally a giant hole in the ground. But when they build this set, they actually had to build the sides up. So they literally had to build this set that was about 20 feet high and, however much wide in order to basically fit the entire, basically crater into it. So. And what's really funny here, they're getting all, so the astronauts, they're kind of looking at it. They've kind of, one of the, I think Floyd's reached out and touched the monolith itself, and they're getting together and they're going to take a picture of it. And what ends up happening is that there's this beam, there's this just sound that just starts emitting that, it's kind of deafening to the, the astronauts' ears, and what we're realizing is that the sun is hitting on the monolith. And there was actually a part of dialogue that was cut from this film, again dialogue, that states that, when the sun hit the monolith, it was the first time in 4 million years that the sun had actually hit that monolith. So it was so again, that was again part of a film that kind of would maybe make things more certain. I don't know. It's kind of. But a piece of information that would have been helpful, but that Kubrick decided to not give us. So, okay, so now we have finally kind of entered the main part, so to speak, of the film. We are entering the Jupiter mission, and what we're seeing here is a giant spaceship called Discovery 1, and it is basically on its way out to Jupiter. And it was really funny reading about this film here. That when they were creating Discovery 1, it was a lot of different designs that were taken in the film. There was a lot of different it should look this way. I think there was one design that it had like heat shields on the back, and there was one sign where it had like these like wing design where it was like a plane. They didn't like that because it looked too much like a dragonfly, so they just decided with this nice long-looking, kind of like snake-looking design. And the model that they used was a huge model. I think it was like 50 feet long, and the Discovery 1, it's a giant spherical ball where like the cockpit and all the living quarters are, and then there's like a long spiral tail with like the exhaust at the end. And I believe the sphere itself was like 6 feet in diameter. It was a giant model that they were filming on. All right. Okay, now we have another great scene here. So we're being introduced to, this is Gary Lockwood playing Dr. Frank Poole, and we're seeing him run around in this, basically this big circular room here. This is the astronauts' main living quarters, and now this is a giant centrifuge set, which essentially was a giant hamster ball. Imagine like a hamster running on his wheel there. It's essentially that with like different like stuff inside, like there's like chairs and like stuff for like them to sit on, like a spaceship, and he's essentially running and kind of showing how the centrifuge works, because it could rotate with, the actors inside, and they showed Lockwood here. He was kind of running up. He was kind of like running, you kind of saw him. He was literally running all around it, and it had its own like artificial gravity, or it didn't. Maybe I don't even know if it had gravity, but but you kind of see how it was really interesting though. And now this shot right here, they're showing Dr. David Bowman, played by Keir Dullea, come in, and what's interesting is that Keir Dullea is entering at the bottom of the centrifuge, and they're showing Frank Poole up at the top. And what actually happened was Gary Lockwood had to be literally strapped in at the top of the centrifuge, and he literally was strapped in upside down on the centrifuge, and then Keir Dullea basically was on the bottom, and they essentially rotated the centrifuge down where Keir Dullea could essentially walk down to meet Frank Poole. So some of these actors. I mean, Keir Dullea and Frank and David Bohm and Frank. No, not Keir Dullea and. Oh, geez, what was it? I literally had his name, and I also mix up their names as well. Gary Lockwood. Okay, so Keir Dullea, Gary Lockwood. I mean, they weren't, super famous actors up until this point. I mean, I know this is probably the one film that they're all, they're both most famous for. I know Gary Lockwood is also, I mean, for other sci-fi films fans, Gary Lockwood is also the guy that portrayed. He played the first villain in the Star Trek pilot episode. He actually was the Star Trek pilot episode where no man had gone before. Basically, the first episode filmed with William Shatner as Captain Kirk. Gary Lockwood played a character. I forgot his name, but he played a character that essentially was Captain Kirk's lifelong best friend, and he became like a god, and he became a villain, but basically Kirk had to fight him to the death and all that kind of stuff. So Gary Lockwood, I mean, he's well known in science fiction, in the science fiction world. So now we're given this BBC 12 broadcast. We're also another Exhibit C of how the future has how this film is basically predicted the future. There's multiple channels, BBC 12, and what's also really interesting is the devices that they're using to watch this BBC broadcast on. They're watching them on these ginormous IBM tablets, and well, as we know, Exhibit D of how this film has predicted the future. We use tablets a lot in our daily lives now. We have the iPad, the Samsung, Galaxy Note tablets, all those tablets. This film, I mean, they, again, predicted the use of tablets and all that kind of stuff. What's interesting is that they weren't able, all these tablets, as I said before, with the displays in the cockpits of the spaceships, they had these tablets are also projections of I think 16 millimeter film projections, basically that were projected above of the actors so that they can project onto the tablets there. Because you got to remember, I mean, the technology used in order to make the to basically have tablet technology was just not around back in 1965 when they were filming this. So we've met Dr. David Bowman, and Dr. Frank Poole, the two main astronauts on the Jupiter mission. Now we're meeting what a lot of people consider the main character of this film, a talking computer known as the heuristically algorithmically programmed 9000 computer, also known as the HAL 9000 computer. And again, Exhibit E of how this film predicted the future. Talking computers. I mean, I have my iPhone right here. Hey Siri, we talk to our iPhones all the time. I mean, I just have my iPhone come up here. So, and it's funny if you actually ask your iPhone, I think they actually mention the HAL 9000 computer actually. And it's really interesting. There's a the HAL 9000 computer is literally a black rectangular thing essentially into the wall, and essentially there's a little glass kind of hemisphere that kind of protrudes out, and is essentially a red light in the middle of it. That's essentially Hal's eye. I mean, he's really there's not a whole lot to his character. How they actually did the effect was essentially the little glass hemisphere was essentially a camera lens, and they literally had red. They had the red light kind of protruding through it. Kind of from the back, so yeah, and then one of the things in this, with the, again, this is probably I'd say the biggest, other than I'd say some of the Haywood Floyd scenes, and this is probably the biggest scene of dialogue and probably in the entire film, and basically what we're being told is that there's this mission with 5 astronauts. 3 of them are in hibernation, and the other 2 are David Bowman and Frank Poole. And HAL 9000 computer. It's essentially the computer that is this computer that's basically running the entire operation of the ship. And And essentially, that there's also this little tidbit here that every single HAL 9000 computer that's ever been has never had an error in judgment, an error in programming, has never made any kind of errors ever, And so it's kind of setting up, what's going to happen kind of in the film there, how the computer ultimately is going to fail. So, let's see here. So we got more shots of that. No, also another thing I really wanted to mention about the Discovery 1 spaceship, the spaceship itself, was that it originally was going to be projected by essentially nuclear warheads, basically being launched out by the back. Essentially what they were going to use is that in space, and this is actually used to, and a lot of people thought that this was actually going to be how spaceships were projected, like literally like propulsion in space. They would literally like dump nuclear warheads behind the spaceship, and then they would explode and propel the spaceship forward. And originally they were going to do that, and for 2001 here, but what ended up happening was that Kubrick decided that hey, we really shouldn't. We shouldn't probably do that because of his old film, of his film that he just released, Dr. Strangelove, was literally a film all about nuclear assured destruction, mutually assured destruction of the human race, and basically the Cold War and how the nuclear arms race. And people were thinking like, yeah, we shouldn't really do that, just after you did this film that basically satirizes the whole, nuclear arms race. And then also what they decided, and then also I think what Kubrick decided was that he didn't really like the idea of the spaceship farting essentially light because essentially I think that was a quote that was like, the spaceship is essentially like farting bombs and essentially farting nuclear waste like every 5 minutes. So they decided against it. So it was a design that was going to happen was going to happen. So they decided not to. So we just saw here there was a little kind of cute scene with Frank Poole, and his parents had sent him like a little happy birthday message. And I kind of like how Gary Lockwood kind of plays the scene, because he basically looks at the message as it kind of it's just kind of cute, but there's not a whole lot of emotion to it, to be quite honest with you. So this is a really, really, I'd say one of the most interesting bits of trivia in this entire film is this little shot right here. This is a shot where Frank Poole is playing the HAL 9000 computer in a game of chess, and Frank makes a move. However, Hal tells him, "Oh, Frank, wait, your move here, it actually causes me to be able to basically checkmate you and basically lose the game." However, and basically the HAL 9000 computer essentially is telling them, like, what the HAL 9000, the moves that the HAL 9000 computer is telling them was that essentially there's actually, I kid you not, there's a Wikipedia article about that chess game. I kid you not on that. And what you realize is that the HAL 9000 computer, basically what he tells him is wrong. I mean, it's not the only end move that he could have made. So there was a little bit of an error in what the HAL 9000 computer told him. Now, the only thing about that makes it really interesting is that Stanley Kubrick is historically known for being an avid chess player. I mean, when he was a young teenager, I mean, he would literally play, literally that was how he made money, was playing like chess game in the park for like 10 hours a day. And he was a part of a really prestigious chess club in New York City where he grew up. And everybody knows that, he wouldn't allow that little small detail to slide, especially something regarding the game of chess. So a lot of people interpret it as the HAL 9000 computer is kind of like putting Frank through like a mental test to test whether or not he's, up to task and all that kind of stuff. But again, I really don't know. I mean, it just, that's what I think it is, especially knowing how much Kubrick knows about, the game of chess. So again, it's kind of, I'd say probably the most interesting piece of trivia would be that little chess game there, and Again, it has its own Wikipedia page as well, where if you wanted to really look into it, you could look it up. So. So I'm going to have another little kind of dialogue-heavy scene here. Of course, any scene in this movie that involves characters just sitting down and talking is a very dialogue-heavy scene. And basically, it's David Bowman, played by Keir Dullea, playing and HAL 9000, essentially talking about how there's been parts of the mission that are quite mysterious, and that we don't really know like why we're going to Jupiter, and essentially, and Hal's even telling David Bowman about all like there's like stories that I've heard about something being dug up on the moon and all this kind of stuff, and he said that even Dr. Bowman and Dr. Poole, the two astronauts who are awake, they had separate preparation from the three astronauts, because they have three astronauts that are in hibernation on the ship there and he's again just kind of commenting on how like everything's so mysterious, and again it just kind of adds to the mysteriousness of the movie and kind of what's going on. Of course, at this point, I'm pretty sure if we're a first time watcher of this film, you're probably watching all this like, what the heck is going on with all this? I mean, it's just it's bouncing from this to that to this to that. I mean, it's like all these like, it's just like all the like, oh my gosh, like what the heck's going on kind of thing. So. So, got an important shot right here, important kind of plot point development here. Essentially, what's happening is is that what Hal discovered is that the I believe it's what they call the AE-35 unit, which is essentially the communications unit that Discovery 1 uses with Mission Control. It's actually Hal, the computer, has discovered that, hey, this unit is going to fail within the next 72 hours. So what's going to happen is that they're doing all these diagnostic checks, and they're actually going to have to go out into like a spacewalk and literally like retrieve the unit, so to speak. So, and there's a nice little scene here in which like you have like sets rotating and the camera rotating and all that kind of stuff, basically like showing the astronauts going into like this separate room here in which they are like climbing up, but as they get into that room in the background, like the room essentially like starts to spin, and they're basically like spinning around on top, around and around and around, and they're not falling down, obviously. So now one thing I wanted to say, they have the so on the set here, they have these little tiny TV monitors, like on a space. They have these like little TV monitors, and that kind of goes back to that these are all like 60 millimeter projections that are essentially being shown onto the screens there. What's actually interesting is that there was a little bit of an infighting between two of the special effects artists that worked on it. I believe it was I don't know if it was Brian Loftus or whoever did it, but I remember there was a guy that was trying to like come up with the problem. A guy by the name of Wally Weavers, who was trying to do the projection problem so he could project all these like displays onto these like little like TVs, and he was having some trouble with it. And another guy came on to another guy who was working on the same thing, kind of was fiddling around with it. He discovered a way of doing it, properly. And Kubrick decided, hey, let's go with that one. And he told, Wally Weavers, the other special effects guy, to basically be like, don't worry about it. And apparently Wally Weavers was a very temperamatic man, and he got really upset by the whole deal. So got a bit of a little infighting. It's actually the infighting with the special effects department on 2001. It's actually been something that's been kind of famously, it's kind of historic for, what happened at the Oscars. I mean, the 1969 Oscars, because even the argument with Stanley Kubrick and the special effects guys themselves, because I believe there were 4 special effects directors. I believe it was Con Peterson, Wally Weavers, Douglas Trumbull, and then there was another one. I believe it was Brian Loftus after that. I'm not sure. But they had 4 guys that were directing the special effects on this movie. And back in the day, back in the 60s, you could only have 3 people accept an Academy Award for Best Special Effects. And 2001: A Space Odyssey won that award for Best Visual Effects. And Stanley Kubrick put his name down as the sole special effects director. And that kind of was a bone of contention with him and like Douglas Trumbull and Wally Weavers and all the other special effects artists that worked on the film there. So, and again, another interesting kind of sound design here. There's no going to be no dialogue for the next few minutes of film here, and as we're watching, all we can hear is this like kind of sound, and then in the background you can hear like the breath, like like you can kind of hear him breathing. These breaths are actually were done actually by Stanley Kubrick. I mean, he was the guy that did all the breathing, and he was doing he did all of that kind of stuff. And again, another aspect of how like Kubrick was probably one of the most famous control freaks in all of Hollywood, in all cinematic history, so to speak. So. And so basically now they're showing they're showing David going out into one of the space pods, and he's going to go out to the AE-35 unit and on the dish there and retrieve the unit so they can have a look at it. And again, all these special effects are done in camera. I mean, they have the little like kind of ball pod there, and then they're gonna have a shot right here. Now this shot here, this is actually done all in camera. They actually had a shot of the space shuttle, and basically the camera's looking up. I believe the camera was looking up, and the space shuttle literally was pointing down, and the guy, and there's a stunt double here who's exiting the space shuttle, or the little shuttle pod. He's essentially on a wire, and he's essentially being lowered way down to the dish there. There's a giant like dish thing that he's going to. So there are a lot of, especially with these scenes, especially a lot of the spacewalk scenes, there's a lot of use of stuntmen, like wire effects, but I mean they look really good. I mean it's an effect that looks really good even today. I mean I'd say I know a lot of people like the film Gravity, but I mean I think it looks even better than that. So of course I've never seen the film Gravity, so so and one thing there's also another thing. One thing that I wanted to I can't even talk. I was going to state is that again how. I've been saying a lot of, how the film has looked so realistic and how the film has, like, predicted, like, all of the, a lot of, what has happened to us today and a lot of the technology that we have today. I believe one of the reasons why they did that was that there were actually 2 technical advisors on the film, 2 men by the name of Fred Ordway and Harry Lange, who I believe were actually, at the time when they started working on this film, they were ex-NASA workers. And, they literally would, and they came up with all these like different, like they would come up with such things as, the space as like, as the spacecraft itself. They came up with, the spacesuits that, Frank and Dave are wearing there. They come up with like, they had like, different, they had like different functions for like they had like this little like wrist like thing where like you could press a button and like different things would happen. And they designed all these like futuristic things that were grounded in reality, and it was basically based on the best guess of what would happen, in basically the year 2001 when this was all happening. So, and it even got to the point where I believe a NASA administrator and then a famous Mercury 7 astronaut, Deke Slayton, they actually went out to, I think, look at the 2001 Space Odyssey film set, and they were so impressed by it, they actually dubbed it NASA East because apparently it looked so much. It was apparently like so much like a space station, and it looked so much like a, NASA, according to those astronauts, those workers. So now Frank has he's taken he's got the AE-35 unit out, and they're basically, him and Frank are running all these diagnostic checks on it, just making sure that it all looks good, just kind of checking everything. And of course Hal is there watching them, and they're doing their thing and all that kind of stuff. And what's going to happen here is ground control is going to come back to them, and they're basically going to be like, "Hey, there is no fault with this unit that you just took out. The HAL 9000 computer is wrong," and that's going to obviously that's really going to kind of propel the story here kind of forward. And you can even see it in their eyes here. Frank and Dave look at each other, and there's nothing wrong with the AE-35 unit and they can't find anything wrong with it. So, and even Hal himself is like, "What the heck is going on about it?" That's another thing about this film, is that that's another interpretation, is what exactly happened with Hal. I mean, did he actually have like a serious breakdown in which he had where he made a mistake but he couldn't admit that he had made the mistake, or was it all part of the plan, or nobody knows really what the true intentions of Hal were, or why he actually had this severe breakdown while in this film. And then they even, state on the ground control guy here, he even states that, yeah, we're actually running tests with our HA, or our identical HAL 9000 90000 computer. It's kind of how they. Niner 000 computer. That's what they. And so they're all basically saying they're all basically telling them how incredible this is, because again the 9000 computer, as they said in the exposition before, the little BBC broadcast, is that the 9000 computer had never had a fault in error or a fault in programming, basically almost up until this time. So, and I love the response that Hal gives here. He basically tells them, how would you counter this discrepancy with you and the twin 9000 computer? And then Hal tells him, well, I would do it because of human error. And I think it kind of tells not the condescension of Hal, but basically how he thinks of himself again as as this infallible object and all that kind of stuff. And I love how Frank and Dave are kind of pushing Hal. Even Frank is coming across as a little pushy about how, are you sure there's never been a programming error in the history of the 9000 computer series? And, they are pushing and pushing him, and obviously, and, you can tell Frank is getting a little bit edgy about it, and, Dave's kind of a cool cucumber. He's kind of like, well, fine, Hal. And so now we have a very interesting scene here in which we're going to have Hal. Interesting scene with Dave and Frank, and they're basically going to go down to down into the pod shuttle bay. Basically, where because they have these three shuttle pods, and they're basically going to go into the shuttle and turn off all the sound equipment so that they can essentially have a conversation away from Hal. And this is actually a really interesting, like, kind of production story regarding 2001: A Space Odyssey. So when they were originally filming the shot, I forgot exactly what their original intentions were, but I remember the story goes that Gary Lockwood, when they were filming the shot, he really didn't like what was going on, and he really was kind of just, well, this is kind of a stupid, scene. And Stanley Kubrick could tell that Lockwood was not really impressed with what was going on, and he was. I think Lockwood even said, like, I knew that this terrible scene would go into this great movie. So apparently, according to Gary Lockwood, he apparently said like this really redneck California dumb comment to Stanley Kubrick, and he basically said, this bleep bleep bleep, this and that. That's basically how I feel about this scene here. And then Stanley Kubrick was quiet, and then he looked over at his assistant director and essentially said, "Oh, that's a wrap." And he wrapped the whole production at like 11 in the morning. So. And it was funny because Gary Lockwood essentially thought that he was going to be fired from the film, and Stanley Kubrick called him up into his room, and he basically like asked Gary Lockwood, like, what's the matter, and said, well, this scene, I just don't like it. I mean, it's kind of dumb, kind of stupid scene. So what ended up happening was that they were trying to brainstorm ideas for them to in order for them to for this scene to happen, in which Hal becomes more and more paranoid, so to speak. And what they ended up coming up with is that why not just have them read their lips when they're in the pod? Because as you can see in the film here, there's the window opening in which Hal can actually see inside of the pod. Now, he can't hear what Frank and Dave are saying, but he can read their lips, and that's something that Hal can do there. And again, this is probably the other big, dialogue dump in this entire film. So, and I love this scene here in which, and I love the line here in which Dave at the end here, they're basically saying like, hey, I don't feel good about it. I think we need to disconnect Hal, and this is happening, and if the unit doesn't fail, then Hal is in error, and we're gonna have to disconnect him. And one thing that they're saying is that he covers all of ship operations, and he's basically in charge of everything on the ship there, that all the life support systems and all that kind of stuff. And there's a quick line from Dave at the end here in which he says, no 9,000 computers ever been disconnected before, and then Frank says, well, no 9,000 computers ever messed up before, and then Dave's like, well, that's not what I mean, and Frank's like, well, I don't get you. I don't know how we'd feel about it. And I think that's really what adds the paranoia to Hal's, what adds to Hal's quote-unquote paranoia, so to speak, or however much paranoia a computer can have. All these deep questions that we're asking, so. Now, what we're seeing here is we're showing a real close-up of Hal's, like, basically his red eye. He's basically got a black circle with like a red light in the middle of it, and we're shown that a lot in this film, and we're kind of shown like scenes in which we see Hal's eye, and then we cut to something else, and then we see Hal's eye again. And I remember one thing that they stated about is that that's a good idea of what they call the Kuleshov effect. Now, the Kuleshov effect is essentially you take the same kind of basically roll of film, basically the same few seconds of film, you intercut it with another thing of film, and then you basically play that same thing of film again, that same roll of film again. And the idea is that whatever you place in the middle of it, or whatever you cut to afterwards, kind of evokes some kind of emotion, of what's going on. Like, for instance, there was like a scene, basically the Russian guy, Kuleshov, that created this. He actually cut these different parts of film together, and it was a man looking at, a soup. It was literally the same shot, the same exact shot of a man, and it would literally go to a shot of the man, and then a shot of something else, and then a shot of, the man again, and apparently with all these different cuts, they were supposed to evoke a different response. There was apparently a response in which the man was apparently it cut to the shot of the man, and then a shot of a bowl of soup, and then the shot of a man again, and then it basically was like, what? And then the conclusion or the emotion was, oh, the man's hungry. But then there was another part where it was the same exact shot of the man, and then it was a shot of a really nice looking woman, and then the shot of the man again. And then from that, we were like, well, the man's lusting over the woman there, all that kind of stuff. And basically what it is that the Kuleshov effect, it essentially it tells us what the character is thinking by just a quick cut, or it tells us what the emotions of the character are by a quick cut. And they have a lot of scenes here in the film here in which you have literally the same static shot of a close-up of Hal's eye, and then it cuts to something else, and then it cuts back to Hal, and whatever it kind of cuts to with Hal, you get the sense that, he's becoming a little bit more and more paranoid, and he's becoming more, maybe questioning of what, Frank and Dave are actually doing. Of course, again, a lot of that's speculation of whether or not he actually goes paranoid or any of that kind of stuff. So that was something another interesting part I wanted to hit. So, and I just talked over the entire intermission there, so that was good actually. It was a good use of the intermission. Again, the intermission of back in the 60s and 50s when you had these epic films that would use overtures and intermissions. They would they would actually have literally like overture cards or intermission title cards in which and then they would have orchestral music playing in the background of both. And again, it was a really it's something you don't see a whole lot every day. I mean, if you see a film today released with an overture and in an intermission, I mean, it's kind of a film that it's probably going to be more of an artsy film. So, all right. So what is happening now? So we have Frank. We are back from intermission. We have Frank now, played by Gary Lockwood, and he is going out into the pod, and he's going to take the AE-35 unit that they had taken out, and he's going to go and replace it into the dish setup. And Frank is inside, and Frank is, and the way that they do this is that, an astronaut, Frank or Dave would be the ones doing the spacewalk, and then the other one is sitting inside, kind of ready to, ready for a contingency plan, or ready as an emergency option in case something bad happens. And so, we're same kind of familiar shot. We have a shot of the pod in the foreground, the astronaut kind of floating down to the dish, but all of a sudden, just slowly, we see the pod slowly rotate, and we were wondering what the heck is going on, and something really awful is about to happen. So again, you get a slow burn of the pod rotating, and then all of a sudden, it's going to do a quick close-up to Hal, whose eyepiece is right in the center of the space pod, and then all the sound cuts out. And then we see Frank just going flying then we see Frank going flying across the way there. And a lot of these scenes here, literally, they were, again, all these scenes, they're showing these scenes of Frank, flying. He got hit by the space pod, and it severed his oxygen hose, and he's going flying off into space now. And Dave is now going to go into the pod and get into a pod and go get him. I mean, all these scenes are shot, on camera. There was a stuntman who was literally jumping off of a platform. He was, flying. I think he had a special harness in which, he could actually be rotated around and kind of be flipped around upside down kind of thing. And the camera was kind of underneath him and was kind of following him as they filmed some of the shots here. And so now Dave is getting into one of the pods. And one thing that we're going to note is that Dave is forgetting his helmet, which we are going to see here in just a second. So again, we have Frank again floating in space, and he's he's floating away. He's lost his oxygen hose, and again, I mean, all these scenes even with like these slow rotation in space, all these like zero-G effects. I mean, it's essentially clever camera tricks with a stuntman on a wire on a harness, and the harness he's wearing allows him to be rotated, flipped upside down, and the camera's positioned a certain way in which you can't see the harness and you can't even see the line holding him up on. So it's all again all very interesting. Again, all very interesting on how they were able to like do a lot of these effect shots in my eyes. And I always love these scenes of Dave, Keir Delay, his face. There's a lot of like projections. There's a lot of like you can see the illuminations of the projections of the screen displays on his face, and it looks like some people have kind of given the allegory where it's kind of like it looks like war paint, and it basically is showing like how primitive humans are in like the overall like evolutionary scale of the film, of the scope of the film, so to speak. Now, one thing you notice here is that one thing you've noticed here, and also with the astronauts as they've gone in this film here, is that there hasn't been a lot of quote unquote emotion exhibited from these astronauts. They're all given kind of robotic, wooden kind of facial expressions and actions on film, and a lot of people kind of state that that's really a bit of a it's a bit of a detractor of the film, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't really. It's a different type of film than what we're used to. I mean, this isn't a film that has like any traditional story character arcs. These characters don't really even have we don't really know of a background story of these characters. I mean, they do have a background story, but we don't know about it, and these characters, and there's not really any like journey other than this journey. There's no really like arcs or revelations that they make. It's just they're just kind of characters that are just kind of along for the ride, so to speak. So now Dave is starting to catch up with Frank's body. Again, they have all these like different displays. A lot of these displays are a lot of the displays again that they are projecting on in the film there in the cockpit there, actually again the displays of the kind of projected kind of from above there. Sorry about that. So again, kind of a slow burn here of what's happening, but Dave is going out to get Frank's body, and there's not a whole lot going on. So, and a lot of these scenes are really what a lot of people will be driven away from when watching this film. I mean, because literally it's just a scene in which it's this long, drawn-out scene in which Dave is going out to get Frank, and it's just shot of Dave's face, shot of Frank's body, shot of Dave's face, shot of Frank's body, back and forth, shot of effect shot of the pod going out to get Dave. I mean, going out to get Frank. I mean, it's all kinds of different. It's a really, really. This gives a slow-paced film like Blade Runner. I mean, this makes Blade Runner look like it's, running like Usain Bolt. I mean, this film's like pace. This film doesn't have a slow pace. It has no pace. I mean, it literally is like a snail crawling, which is honestly what Kubrick wanted. So, and this scene. So now Dave is caught up with Frank's body, and he's using the pod that they have. They're using these they have like these mechanical arms that they're using, and he's kind of caressing Frank's body into the pod arm so he can return him back to the ship. And it was funny because when they were filming that shot they had a stuntman that was filming that shot, and the stuntman, again, he had a harness on, and he was able to kind of spin as if he was spinning freely in space. And it showed, there was a shot of him, it showed him his head hitting the arms of the space pod. And what they actually did when they were filming the scene there, they actually would film it at a faster rate, and then they would slow the film down as to give it a more zero gravity, lifelike kind of vibe to it. And so when that stunt double was actually hitting his head on the what was it, the control arms there, he was hitting his head pretty tough, actually. So it was it was pretty must have been rough day for that guy. So we have a computer malfunction. We have a problem here, and Hal has essentially gone homicidal here. He is the one that is controlling the life support systems of the astronauts that are in hibernation, because they show these 3 astronauts that are in hibernation, and they're basically frozen in these little pods here, and it shows that Hal basically controls their life systems, and they're saying a computer malfunction, life function's critical, and that kind of thing. And it shows basically all these, different systems in their body just failing, metabolic levels failing, locomotor systems failing, central nervous systems failing, and flat lines across the board. All those people are now dead, so life function's terminated. And again, it's a great little, and again, going back to the Kuleshov effect, it's a great use of the Kuleshov effect, because it shows these shots of Hal's eye up close, and then it shows computer malfunction, shows Hal again, shows all the systems failing, and it gives the idea that it gives you, and nothing is being said, and it's the same shot of Hal's eyes, and it's so chilling, like just how, and there's barely any sound other than what you just heard there, but there's no sound, and it's a really chilling effect of how Hal becomes he's just so cold. He just kills these characters off, and we don't even know why he kills them off anyway. He doesn't know why they killed him in the first place. So, and now we get the famous "Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal" exchange with Dave and Hal. So. And then we're basically, affirmative, Dave, I read you loud and clear. And then Hal is basically telling him, that you can't serve this mission's purpose any longer, and all that kind of stuff. And I think actually, it's actually funny. I think if you actually ask your iPhone, I'm not going to say, the hey whatever on the iPhone, but if you actually ask your iPhone, open the pod bay doors, I think they're saying, I'm sorry, I'm afraid I can't do that. So, and again, a lot of these scenes of Hal in which it's a simple shot of Hal, his eye, and then it's cutting back to Dave's face. It's just, you get the Hal's voice is not emoting a lot of emotion, but you can get the sense that he's really just this cold, calculating, villain now. And Dave, you can see he's finally starting to crack just a little bit, but not too much. He's still kind of holding on to his cool, probably a lot better than a lot of other people would in this situation. And then again, I remember telling you this a little bit. Dave forgot his space helmet, and Hal's not allowing him into the ship now. And so now what Dave said is that I'm going to have to go in through the emergency airlock. And what that means is that Dave is going to be basically in the vacuum of space for essentially, a couple seconds. Now, there was actually, in the film when they were making it, there was a lot of debate on whether or not a human could actually survive in the vacuum of space. Now, a human can for a very short amount of time in the vacuum of space. Now, it's something that you don't want to be in the vacuum of space for very much longer than you have to be. But I mean, Dave here, it's only about a 15-second interval there. I mean, it's apparently been proven possible that you could survive for little amounts of time in there. So. But unfortunately, because he has to, since he can't get inside the ship, he has to let Frank's body kind of go, so. And I'd say these scenes right here with Dave are probably the most emotional scenes, of most emotional acting probably in the entire film. Because again, most of the actors, they don't really portray much of any emotion at all, so. And even Dave's face, I mean, he looks really just robotic and just kind of, like he's about to kill somebody, honestly. And there goes Frank. Goodbye, Frank. It's like the little space pod kind of waves goodbye to him when he goes, so. Again, not a whole. These are some of the really slow scenes here. While kind of waiting for Dave to get back into the ship here. I'm pretty sure while a lot of people are watching this film, I mean, a lot of them are probably wondering, why is it keep doing this? Get on with it. But again, that's just kind of what Kubrick does, And again, they have some great shots of the pod here kind of rotating around. Let's see, we're about an hour and 46 minutes. I don't have anything to talk about when I'm starting to talk about the time on the recording here. And again, such long shots here. Kubrick. Kubrick is a director. He's his films, they have a sense of distance. You got a lot of films that you feel like they're personal films, like they're personable films. There's a sense of, in these films, there's a sense of coldness in a lot of Kubrick's films, and I think it just reflects kind of his cold, like stance on like human nature. I mean, Kubrick's kind of a guy that's, when you listen to him, he's a bit of a nihilist. He's kind of. Humanity doesn't really have a whole lot of, he basically is one of those guys that, life doesn't really have any meaning, and one of those kind of people and all that kind of stuff. And he has a really, like, kind of dark sense of humor, and he's, especially with, like, a lot of the films that he makes. I mean, Dr. Strangelove, dark black comedy. I mean, Clockwork Orange that he made, 3 years after this film is a very, very dark kind of view of humanity, so to speak. And a lot of these films that, they do, I mean, they don't really, cast humanity, in the greatest of light. I mean, he doesn't, you can tell that Kubrick doesn't have the fondest of, he doesn't think very highly of the human race. Let's just put it that way. Now, whether or not you agree with that, I mean, that's kind of, that's everybody's, kind of, some people, I mean, I think would be like, heck yeah, I totally agree with that. And some people are like, well, I don't know about that. But, it's still, I mean, it definitely, but also you can tell, there's a sense of that in his films, but I mean, his films are just, they're exquisitely made. I mean, I'd say, like, I mean, maybe not storytelling-wise, he's not the greatest director of all time, but when it comes to, like, technical acumen and, like, quality of the product on the screen, I don't think there's any director that even comes close to, like, the director that Kubrick is, I mean, some directors, I would say, have better storytelling techniques. Some directors, I think, tell, more kind of fan-pleasing, movies and more fan-pleasing stories. But, I mean, Kubrick, the quality that he's able to the quality that he's able to put on film is just, I think, second to none, to be quite honest with you. And so now Dave is arming the explosive bolts on the space pod, and he is now about to basically explode into the airlock. Now, this is a scene in which Keir Dullea actually did his own stunts here. And the reason is because, the character of David Bowman, he forgot his helmet. So what they did here is that they built the set basically facing down, and then there's no sound here. It's funny. What happens is, on action, the bolts explode. Keir Dullea literally goes face first straight down to the ground, and then there was a roustabout that essentially he was hooked up to a tether. And essentially, a roustabout waited till this knot came in, and he essentially grabbed the knot, and then jumped off this platform, and then it caused Keir Dullea to kind of come hurtling back up to the top of the set, and there was this really nice little back and forth kind of bouncing effect with nice little like weightless effect with Keir Dullea on that scene. And so now Dave is going now to Hal's higher brain circuits, and he is going to disconnect him. And all of these shots going into where Dave is going up to Hal are actually handheld shots. You can tell because they're really jerky. A lot of shaky camera movement. Because, again, this was before the years of the Steadicam, in which, your handheld shots would have a sense of jerkiness and jerkiness to it. And a lot of these handheld shots are actually done by Kubrick himself. Again, Kubrick, he's, the most, involved director, I'd say ever, I think, when it comes to, the actual photography of his film. The thing with Kubrick was his original career was a photographer for Look magazine, way back, I think, in the 40s. But then he got into filmmaking, and that was really his obsession with film lenses and cameras, camera types and all that kind of stuff. But he was such a fanatic about getting the lighting absolutely right, getting the blocking of a shot absolutely right, and making sure basically everything in the film was done the way that he wanted it to be done. So and so now Dave is going into the giant brain circuit room of Hal. And now this set is a really interesting set. This was like a 4-story high set in which they would literally dangle like stuntmen down and all that kind of stuff. This set was literally 4 stories tall, and people inside it, literally you had to be like and literally they would film the scene facing up, and then they would literally have the actors, the stunt double, literally coming down in a kind of zero-G manner. And then there are scenes in which you can see Dave kind of just literally, he's kind of screwing out the brain circuits of Hal, and there's also scenes in which Dave's kind of in which Keir Dullea is like sitting literally on a chair. So now I've waited way until the end here to actually discuss the voice of HAL 9000. So the voice of HAL 9000 was a bit of a mystery throughout the entire production. Nobody really knew what he was going to sound like, literally up until post-production. There were a couple actors that they had hired. There was Martin Balsam, who they were originally going to try and hire for the part. However, Martin Balsam, if you don't know, he was the lead detective in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. He was the detective that gets killed by Norman Bates in Psycho. And then, if you also have watched the 1957 film 12 Angry Men, he was the lead juror, the juror number 1, the lead juror in that one. So he was one of those guys. But he didn't like Martin Balsam's voice because he said that it was a little bit too of a New York, Britain, American accent. So what they decided to do was they hired another actor called Nigel, and his name was Nigel Davenport. However, Nigel Davenport, they realized, like, well, his voice is a little bit too British. His accent's a bit too British. So we're gonna go in another direction. So they literally had a combination of, when they were filming the scenes, a combination of Kubrick himself giving Hal's lines to the actors, and then there was also they also had their assistant director Derek Cracknell, who would also give Hal's lines. And Derek Cracknell, he sounded like Michael Caine, he was very funny British sounding voice, and I could have imagined how Frank and Dave, how Frank and how Gary and Keir would actually keep their wits about them and not just start laughing out loud. So. And then finally, Kubrick discovered a Canadian actor by the name of Douglas Rain, and Douglas Rain had been a narrator about a short documentary film about like space. I forgot what the name of the documentary was, but he had been a narrator for this documentary, this Canadian made documentary, which I believe I think either won or was nominated for the best documentary short or something like that. And he decided to cast Douglas Rain because his voice is just so, just so flat and not a whole lot of, accent or anything. It's just so, monotone in tone. So Douglas Rain, he literally recorded all of his lines in about a day's worth of work. And apparently the stories would go that he was apparently upset when anybody would ask him about it, because he literally did this film in one day, and he was kind of like, well, I don't really like being judged for only like an entire life of acting, only being known for 9 hours of work. So because he did this film about 9.5 hours. So now Hal is getting all of his brain circuits kind of unplugged by Dave. Like, he literally has like this little like special like screwdriver tool that he turns, and then like the circuits come out. And Hal is starting to sing a song called Daisy. He's like, Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too. And he's singing this song, and it's actually famous because that was a song that was actually sung by an actual computer at the Bell and Howell Labs, I believe in 1940, in the 40s, in which the co-writer of this film, Arthur C. Clarke, attended that. And if you actually go on YouTube, you can actually find the Daisy Bell song sung by a computer, and it sounds like the voice like, Daisy, Daisy, give me your answer too. It sounds like a computer singing it. So now Dave has finally unplugged basically Hal from the controls of the ship. Now what is happening is that there's a pre-recorded message from Haywood Floyd, the guy that was in the earlier parts of the film. He comes back and he essentially is telling us what this purpose of the Jupiter mission is. There's the monolith that was on the moon that the astronauts had went to go see emitted a powerful radio beam pointed towards Jupiter, and that's why they had this mission on the Discovery 1 to go out to Jupiter and discover, what the heck was the radio beam was, transmitting. And again, and what Floyd says is that this was only known by the HAL computer, and he was told not to tell anybody. So that kind of adds into part of the paranoia with Hal and why he malfunctioned and all that kind of stuff. And again, it just answers the question of why are they going to Jupiter, and it just kind of gives another great something, so to speak. I forgot what was going to finish that. So, and then our final shot, we have a title card that says Jupiter Beyond the Infinite, and then what we see here is that there is another giant monolith that is floating in Jupiter's space. Now in the film here, this planet that was their destination was actually not supposed to be Jupiter. It was actually supposed to be Saturn. Actually, originally it was Jupiter, but then Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke wanted it to be Saturn because, they thought that Saturn would look really awesome on film, and they thought, hey, Saturn with all the its rings and all that kind of stuff. But while they were making the special effects, they were already so behind on the effects that they had made, and they just didn't have the time and or the money to put into making realistic looking Saturn rings, and they frankly couldn't make the realistic looking rings on Saturn. So Kubrick decided, hey, let's just make the planet, let's just make it Jupiter, and that's what it'll be in the movie. However, in the book, the destination planet is actually still Saturn. So if you read the book 2001: A Space Odyssey, Frank and Dave are actually going to Saturn instead of Jupiter. So, and again, all these planets, there's a lot of special, technical photographic wizardry that went into filming Jupiter. I mean, there was all these rotations, and they had to do all these shots of the sun, and again they had to all photograph them on these different elements, and then they had to composite them onto one strip of film and that kind of thing. And apparently, according to one of the stories, is that Stanley Kubrick actually took out an insurance claim on basically every time that during the filming process one of the effects shots was messed up, which according to one of the source, the Cinema Tyler documentary series that I watched on 2001, there was it was actually almost an everyday occurrence that they would mess something up. So I mean there was $6.5 million of this budget went to making the special effects on this film, and it was a lot. It was a lot. So, and so I believe we have another Ligeti thing here. I think this is Requiem. It's the song it's the piece that's been playing with the monolith every time the monolith has appeared. Has appeared on screen here. And basically what we're seeing is that the Discovery 1 spacecraft has entered into Jupiter space, and Dave now is getting into the space pod, and he's going to go out and investigate the big monolith there. Now the difference with this monolith with the last two, the one in the Dawn of Man sequence and the one on the Tycho magnetic anomaly number 1 monolith, was that this monolith is way bigger than that. I mean, this one is ginormous. I mean, it's a huge monolith. And Dave is going to go up, and he's basically going out in the pod to investigate, and he's going to go up, and he's going to be basically, for a lack of a better word, he's going to be transported somewhere where we have no comprehension of where he's going. And it's going to get really weird if you watch the film here. I mean, again, this scene that I'm talking over, I mean, I really can't describe it very well. This is something you just have to watch. It's something you just have to see to believe it. Now, we have a great alignment of what looks like Jupiter and all of its moons, and then the monolith is right in the middle there. And then all of a sudden the monolith disappears. The camera pans up, and while the Requiem music, we got all these humanistic voices playing, and then all of a sudden, from the space, we're looking at a blank picture of space, we get these colors come in. We get these streaks of light, all of different colors that just come in, and they're just going past us in a certain speed, going past us, and Dave is now in the pod. He is traveling through basically what they call the Stargate. And essentially what the Stargate is, it's all these different lights and all these different, basically just lights that are just flying past the camera. Now, the way that this was done, it's a type of photography that's called slit scan photography, which it's used a lot. Essentially, imagine it's used as the it was used as, I'm pretty sure, the star effect in which whenever a ship in Star Wars goes into hyperspace, and it also apparently was used as an effect on it was used for the Superman title card sequence whenever the Superman logo kind of flies in, but you kind of see a streak of light streaks of the letters fly by. So basically, we're just looking at colors on the screen just flying by. And again, this is the Stargate that we're in now. Now, this is the work of Douglas Trumbull, who was again one of the special effects guys on this film. The way that he was able to do this was he created this giant rig where he essentially had a camera on like a rail mount. He essentially placed the camera on a rail mount, and he had this little like slit. It was like a really like thin like piece. It was like a thin like window in which the camera would look into. And then on the other side of the slit, he would basically have like all this like different like colorful artwork that he would basically go for. And essentially, what they would do is they would turn the camera on and have an exposure, and they would move the artwork behind it, and then they would move. But as they move the artwork behind it, they would move the camera on the rail closer to the slit as the camera was being exposed. And what happened was that it left like this streak of light. Like if you've ever seen a camera that's like photographing like like a lane, like a highway, and you see like those like streaks of light that the car lights leave. That's kind of what like the process, like that's what it kind of would look like. That's what the process kind of looked like. So that was essentially the Stargate scene. Now we're getting into like these scenes in which we're essentially seeing all these like psychedelic like stars and like different like looking universes and like planet looking shapes. Like I think we just saw like a star like literally exploding in front of us, and we're seeing like all these like different like colors and shapes and whatnot. These were actually done very early on in the production of the film. Like literally these were like the first things that were done on 2001: A Space Odyssey. Because literally Kubrick would do these in his house, and what they would do is he would literally have like these like trays of like black paint and black lacquer, and he would literally drop like different colored paints and whatnot into the lacquer, and he would literally film what would happen to everything. And apparently it was really tough to film because like he had to like have like a lot of light on the lacquer and a lot of light on the paint, and the paint, if the light would stay on it for too long, it would like there would some kind of chemical reaction would happen to it. So it was again, and it's really, really weird and trippy as you're going through this. And again, you're seeing all you're seeing is literally colors. You're not we're not seeing any human characters on it. Like we see there's a couple times where we see like Dave's eye. And we get like these like different shots of close-ups of like Dave's eye, and they go through like different like colors of it. Like there's like a different like color like schemes and whatnot. And but again, we're not seeing like any like characters or anything for that matter on this on the film here. And it literally keeps doing this. I think literally for the next like 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, it does it for a while. And again, I mean, I think the purpose of the whole thing is like Dave is being transported literally through time and space. Like he's literally being transported through dimensions while this is happening. I mean, this is my interpretation of what's happening. It's literally you are looking through time and space while you're going through the Stargate. And again, it's just been colors and like lacquers. I mean, nothing happening in this film. I mean, nothing happening at all, really. And again, this part of the movie was really wild. 2001 became popular with like young, younger audiences. Actually, you'd have a lot of college students that would go see this film, and they would be high, and they would watch this like Stargate sequence, and they would be really trippy as they were watching it. And I mean, rightfully so. I mean, it's all these colors going through. It's all these different looking psychedelic. It's so weird while watching it. It's just, nothing that honestly, this is something that you'd never seen before on film before. And honestly, I don't think you've seen a lot of this something like this afterwards. I mean, and again, all this is done in like on camera. I mean, they did this in some way. I mean, this isn't like they went into like, movie shop and like all the stuff that they're doing here. Like they got all these different colors that are on screen, and it's just really amazing how Doug Trumbull was able to pull this off. And again, you get real close close-ups of Dave's eye here, and they're in these like different color schemes. Now, what is happening is that you're getting all these landscape shots. Now, these landscape shots, a lot of them were filmed. You're getting. I'm pretty sure this is literally this looks like the Grand Canyon. However, it's like an orange and blue looking color scheme to it. I mean, you're getting all these landscape shots, but they're just different color schemes. That you wouldn't even imagine. And again, a lot of this was done in kind of second unit shooting, in airplanes and helicopters and that kind of thing. And what they would do was that a lot of these shots here, how they would get these colors on here is that they would literally, because 2001: A Space Odyssey is a film that's colored by Technicolor, and there's a process to color, and there's a process I think they call it the separation process, in order to essentially colorize the film, in which you do literally, I think it's yellow, cyan, and magenta, and you literally combine all the into different film mediums, and then you combine that with a black and white strip of film, and you print it all together, and that gives you a colorized form of film. That gives you colored film. Again, I may have butchered that. If you really want to know the Technicolor process, I've obviously look it up. I gave a really, really bare bones and probably not correct description. But in that process of Technicolor processing, if you did if there was a little mistake in the processing in the printing, or or one of the settings was wrong, then it would come out to be these really weird and strange colors, and that's what we're seeing right here. And Kubrick decided that, man, that's something that's amazing. Let's use that for the film. And so what he had and I forgot the guy who really worked on this, but he had his guy that was doing the separation process. He basically had this way of adjusting the settings, the aperture, the exposure time. And he had and they had different settings to hey, you can, if you do this settings, you have an orange and blue color scheme, or you could do a yellow and purple color scheme. But then he also had a spindle where he would literally have random, he would literally just set the settings in a random way, and it gave him these really, really, really awesome and weird different color schemes that nobody had really ever thought of before. And it's again, it's really interesting stuff to look at. And here, you get a teal color with a burnt orangish looking color. I mean, it's all really weird looking imagery and whatnot. And again, what I think is going on, I think in the film here is literally you're seeing alien, Dave going through alien worlds, and he's doing all this stuff. So now we're going to find ourselves that Dave has entered into this Louis the 14th looking really regal looking hotel room, and it's going to be really interesting looking at this. It's a really ominous and really weird looking room. It's essentially imagine you're at a really fancy hotel, and it's designed in a really old fashioned style. That's basically what Dave has been transported to. And it's a really cold environment, and there's not a lot, there's nobody else in there, and you can kind of hear these ominous sounds in the coming up from outside of the room. It's really quite honest with you, a creepy scene, to be quite honest, when you watch it. I mean, and then you're gonna and then what's gonna happen is that Dave, the astronaut Dave Bowman, he's gonna start aging rapidly. He's gonna literally start becoming older and older and older and older, and it's gonna start here. He's literally what's gonna happen is and the way that they kind of frame it is that younger Dave is gonna see an older version of himself. But then that older version of himself, that's what he becomes, and then the younger version disappears. And then this kind of keeps going on and on until he gets into an age in which he's really, really old, and kind of on his deathbed. And so we're now Dave is kind of out. He's still in his spacesuit. He's in this orange-looking spacesuit that he did to went out in, and he's basically walking around the room, and he's kind of just trying to get his bearings about him, see what the hell's going on. And he's walking around, and he's just looking at what the heck's going on, and as I have been talking this entire time, there has been no spoken dialogue, absolutely no dialogue, and there's not going to be any more dialogue in the entire film. I mean, literally, this film, 40 minutes of dialogue in the entire film. So one thing I wanted to talk about during this, kind of another example of lighting in how Kubrick is really just meticulous about how the lighting in his films. The lighting in this scene, literally all the light is coming from the floor. Like, if you actually look at the scene in the movie here, the floor, like the tiles on the floor, are literally they have like these giant lights coming through them, and it kind of, and again, another example of how it really became hot on set. You kind of saw you kind of see all, like, you see Keir Dullea, he's wearing his really heavy spacesuit, and he looks out. He's seen, and now the younger David Bowman, he looks out and he sees an older version of himself eating food. And then the older version of himself is going to come investigate, but then the younger version of himself is going to disappear. So. It's kind of funny. It's like a really slow, like, reveal of how old Dave, like, he looks back to see if there's anybody there, but the younger Dave's not there. So, and again, this is Keir Dullea and like all kinds of like old man looking makeup and that kind of thing. So and again, it's another example of this, of what the hell is going on in this movie, because like you see it, and we just went through all these like psychedelic colors and all this like psychedelic like imagery, and then we come to this scene in which we're in this like really weird looking room, and we're seeing Dave, like these different people coming through, like older versions of Dave, and it's like we're still wondering like what the heck's going on, and we, quite honestly, we don't really get that much of an answer. Now, one thing that was interesting was towards the end of the film here, they actually were going to have an actual ET, an alien, come through and kind of take Dave by the hand and kind of lead him to become the Star Child, which, something that we'll kind of hit on later in a second here. But there was going to be an actual alien in this film, and, the thing that the alien presence is always implied in this film. I mean, people, it's well known that the monolith is a stand-in for an extraterrestrial intelligence. The monolith is and what people think that this whole room is, that this room is essentially all these, omniscient, like, alien beings that are basically watching Dave, and the reason that they created this room for him is that, this is the room that they went into literally his mind, and they discovered that this is the room that Dave's going to be, most comfortable in. And so Dave's like, he's eating his food, and like he's got like now they have like an older version of Dave, and he's like sitting at this table, and he's eating this plate of food with this glass, and it's funny, they show the older version of Dave, he knocks the glass off, and that, I believe, was actually an idea that Keir Dullea himself came up with, and it's like, hey, why don't I just, while looking at the final version of myself, I accidentally knocked the glass off. So he knocks the glass off, and then Dave looks up at the Dave. He hears a faint something coming from the bed, and he looks up and he sees the final old version of himself on his deathbed. And then what's going to happen is that you're going to see the monolith one more time, and then Dave is going to be transformed into what's called the Star Child. The Star Child is essentially, it's like a baby-looking figure that is encased in a big ring of light, and people have stated that it means that Dave is he's gone from his body, like he's discarded his body, and now he's in a form that only somebody with this much evolution has been able to, attain. I mean, or, I don't really know. It's, and again, it's probably a really, like, if you're watching this for the first time, it'd probably be a really, like, what the heck happened at the end here. So the monolith, reappears in front of Dave on the bed here, and it shows him, like, slowly reaching out to kind of touch it. And again, it's just another example to me, of how the monolith is just, it basically, every time that something in this movie, every time that humans take the next step in evolution, the monolith is there. The monolith was there when, the prehistoric humans, basically humans' ancestors, discovered, weapons, discovered tools. The monolith was there whenever humans were able to achieve, space flight enough in which they could, go to the moon and, dig up the monolith. And then it was there when they were able to achieve deep space flight enough in order to reach Jupiter. The one that reaches Jupiter is the one that's going to be evolved into a being that's, far and above, the human race, could ever imagine. So, and, there's all kinds of, like, religious allegories, and some religious, interpretations, right? The Vatican itself, the Vatican, literally the center of the Catholic Church endorsed this film as, one of its, top films to watch of all time. So it's, and again, the final shot here, you got Dave as the Star Child. He's literally, there's a shot of him looking at the Earth, and then it's going to, basically, the Zarathustra theme is going to kind of play out, and that's going to end the film, so. And that's, and again, a very, very, very odd film, a very, very ambiguous ending to a very peculiar film, so. And I love how it says this film in little print up there. This film was directed and produced by Stanley Kubrick. So this film came out, premiered April 2nd, 1968. And originally it was mixed reviews. I mean, there were some people that really, really liked it, and then there were a lot of people that really didn't like it because of how, slow, dull-paced it was and all that kind of stuff. And to be quite frank with you, that has predominantly kind of stayed the narrative of the film. It has become since, a part of, a big part of pop culture, and I believe because of that, it's become a big part of, it's become, that's really the reason why people consider, the greatest film, ever made. And, even like, contemporary directors, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, they all state that this film was, literally the beginning of something. It was like their generation's quote unquote Big Bang, as what they kind of said. So, and this film actually brought Stanley Kubrick his only Oscar. As I stated earlier, it was the only Kubrick film to win. It won the Academy Award for best visual effects. It's actually funny. That's the title card right here. Best special effects. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, and then they have Wally Weavers, and they'll have Douglas Trumbull here. And then who else do they have? Special effects supervisor Con Peterson, and then I think it's somebody else. Tom Howard. Oh yeah, it was Tom Howard. I thought it was somebody else, but. And so, and then as we end the film here, we're being treated to the Blue Danube once more, and that's also what we'll end this film with. So, 2001. A legacy. It's definitely a film that 50 years later. It's a film that's still being talked about as as groundbreaking. It's a film that it's revolutionary in, the filmmaking world for, its use of, special effects and its use of, storytelling techniques and, its advanced, kind of ideas, of evolution, so to speak. but also I think like in a pop, like maybe that was a pop culture, but even like in the cultural reference, I mean, it's like a lot of, technology from this film ended up, it's like Star Trek in the sense that a lot of technology from this film, essentially ended up, happening. I mean, there was, they have the tablets, they have, the phone, the video calls, they have, all these, things that, we have nowadays. I mean, like really terrible looking space food, but, again, it's something that's, really, really cool to look back on. And I will admit, for if somebody here was actually to, go watch this film for the first time and watch it for the first time without having, maybe even without listening to this, while listening to this podcast, you might have like a better understanding. But if somebody went in, had never listened to this podcast, had went in cold turkey, I'm not going to lie, it's a bit of a tough film to get through. I mean, it's really... Again, it's an event film. You have to make an event out of watching it. It's not something that it's not something that you could just kind of casually put on like Avengers or like an MCU film. It's something that just, you gotta, you really gotta give, not only, you have to give an effort to watch it. That's the second thing I need to say. So, let me see what other is there. And honestly, I mean, I think that might be it regarding the film here. I mean, it's definitely I'd say one of the greatest films, I think put together, on celluloid. And again, I mean, something that if you're a film buff, it's not a highly recommend, it is a must watch. I mean, this is a film that, has been studied, like in film schools. I mean, it's for how you do, literally how you film stuff. So, there's also the Blue Danube kind of finishing out the credits here, and it's going to keep kind of going. So, you know what? And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. That is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And again, directed by one of the greatest directors of all time, Stanley Kubrick. I mean, this was, I would say, really the film that put him as the film genius, of our time. I mean, he made some great other films after this, but I mean, if he didn't make this film, then, he would not have the legacy that he has. So this is definitely, I think, the magnum opus of his career, I think. So, again, that's the last thing I'll say on the whole thing. So, again, everybody, thank you so much for watching, or listening to the Movie Commentary Podcast. Check out this film if you have not watched it. 2001: A Space Odyssey. It is, a must-watch film for anybody who loves film. So please check it out if you have not watched it. If you've listened to the podcast already, if you've listened to this podcast this far, you're going to have a lot better grasp of, kind of what's going on in the film and, parts of it. So it could help you by listening to this, but I definitely would recommend if you've listened this far and haven't watched it, then please go watch it. So that is all I got. Again, this is Nick Everett talking for the Movie Commentary Podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure to check out other episodes of the Movie Commentary Podcast, and just make sure you guys stay golden out there, and I will see you on the flip side.